Yoga Sutra, Sutra 18. Virama pratyaya bhyasa purva samskara shesonya. Cessation, dropping content of the mind, the seed of samprajnata samadhi. Practice preceded by impressions, remnant, the other. The remnant impression left in the mind on the dropping of the pratyaya after previous practice is the other, a samprajnata samadhi. The nature of a samprajnata samadhi is defined in this sutra. The meaning of the sutra should be clear to some extent in the light of what has been said already in connection with the previous sutra. Let us dwell for a while on the various phrases used in this sutra. Virama pratyaya means the cessation of pratyaya. This, of course, refers to the seed of samprajnata samadhi, which is dropped and disappears from the field of consciousness in the practice of a samprajnata samadhi. Some commentators interpret this phrase as the idea of cessation or the cause of cessation. This would mean that the yogi meditates on the idea of cessation of pratyaya or on para-vairagya. This interpretation does not seem to be justified in the present context, and if analyzed carefully, will be seen to mean nothing but the dropping of the seed held in the preceding samprajnata samadhi. A yogi who is meditating on a seed can drop it with the production of a void state of the mind, but he cannot leave the seed of samprajnata samadhi and start meditating on the idea of cessation. Anyone can see that such a switchover from one idea to another of an entirely different nature in the state of samadhi is impossible. Abhyasa purva means preceded by practice. Practice of what? Practice of holding in the mind the seed of samprajnata samadhi. This phrase, therefore, serves to emphasize the fact that a samprajnata samadhi can be practiced only after the prolonged practice of samprajnata samadhi. It is, as has been pointed out already, an intensely active and not a passive condition. In fact, the recession of consciousness in a samprajnata samadhi and its passage through the laya center depends upon the continuance of the constant pressure of the will, which is at the back of the effort to keep the mind in the state of samprajnata samadhi. There is no change in the mind in the state of there is no change in this condition if the mind accepts the disappearance of the pratyaya. The pressure must be built up in samprajnata samadhi before it can be utilized in asamprajnata samadhi. The bow must be drawn before the arrow is released to pierce through the target. Samskara shesha means the remnant impression. The impression which is left in the mind after the pratyaya of one plane has been dropped, and before the pratyaya of the next plane appears, can under normal conditions only be void. But this void is not a static state, although it may be felt to be so by the yogi when he is passing through it. It is a dynamic condition because consciousness is being slowly or quickly transferred from one plane to another, as shown in Figure 1. Consciousness cannot remain suspended indefinitely in a void. It must emerge on one of the two sides of the laya center. If the technique of Nirodha Parinama has not been mastered sufficiently, it may spring back into the plane which it has just left, and the seeds which had been dropped will then reappear. But if the mind can remain in the Nirodha state for a sufficiently long time, as indicated in Section 3, Sutra 10, consciousness will emerge sooner or later into the next higher plane. Well, let's go to Section 3, Sutra 10. So section 3, Sutra 10, Tasya Prashanta Vahita Samskarat. Its flow becomes tranquil by repeated impressions. The tendency of the mind to remain in the niruddha state also grows with practice and ultimately becomes so strong by the force of samskaras that it can remain in that condition easily for any length of time. So by continual practice, you're creating a new samskara or impression, and this is a more positive one that enables you to stay in that state. Okay? All right, where was I? Okay. There are two other interesting points which may be discussed briefly before we leave the subject of a samprajnata samadhi. One is the nature of the point O in figure number 1, through which consciousness passes from one plane to another. This point, which has been called the laya center, is the common center in which all the vehicles of the jivatma may be said to be centered. It is only through such a center, which is called a bindu in Sanskrit, that transference of consciousness from one plane to another can take place. As a matter of fact, there is only the center of reality surrounded by a number of concentric vehicles, and whichever vehicle is illuminated by consciousness derives its illumination from that center. So it depends on what you're focusing on, right? But the concentration of consciousness in a particular vehicle makes it appear as if the consciousness is moving up and down along the line or point which connects all the vehicles. An adept whose consciousness is permanently centered on the atmic plane focuses his attention temporarily in any particular vehicle, and for the time being, the objects connected with that vehicle come within the field of his consciousness. The center of his consciousness thus appears to have moved into one vehicle or another, but in reality, it has not moved at all. Consciousness, which is all the time centered in reality, has merely been focused in one vehicle or another. It is in this particular sense that the transference of consciousness from one vehicle to another in samadhi must be understood if we are not to become involved in the philosophical absurdity of imagining consciousness which transcends time and space moving from one place to another. So consciousness never moves. It is unmoving and eternal, right? It is the foundation upon which everything else rests. And it's our attention, right, that is what moves, right, through the different vehicles. The second point, which the student may note in this connection, is that the common center of all vehicles being the meeting point of all the planes, consciousness must always be withdrawn to this before it can be transferred to another vehicle, just as a person going along one road must return to the crossing before he can take to another road. So you're constantly going, well, wherever you locate the center, right? A lot of people locate the center in the heart. A samprajnata samadhi will be thus seen to be nothing but this withdrawal of consciousness to its laya center before it can begin to function on another plane. If the consciousness remains permanently established in the center of reality, as it is in the case of a highly advanced adept, the question of withdrawing it to the center does not arise. From this vantage ground, he commands an all-embracing view of all the lower planes and can instantaneously begin to function on any plane he likes. The question may be asked why, if this common center of all vehicles is also the center of reality within each yogi, he does not get a glimpse of reality in passing through it from one plane to another. The possibility of such a glimpse certainly exists on account of the unique nature of this point. What then prevents the yogi from touching reality every time he practices a samprajnata samadhi? The answer to this question is contained in some of the sutras occurring in the latter portion of section 4. It is the samskaras still burdening the yogi's mind which obscure his vision and prevent him from obtaining a glimpse of reality. These samskaras must be destroyed completely before he is free to pass into the realm of reality from whatever point he wills. But Though the yogi, still burdened with samskaras, cannot gain a clear glimpse of reality, he can sense, as it were, the reality more and more as he makes progress toward his goal, and the burden of his samskaras becomes lighter. Viewed in this manner, every successive samprajnata samadhi is a precursor of Nirbija Samadhi, which alone gives an unobstructed vision of reality. Thank you for joining me today.